Hello, everybody. How are you? Guys, it's Joe back with another parody video about Charlotte. And in this case, we're going to talk about the neighborhoods. We're going to talk about the neighborhoods. And like all of these videos, it's complete nonsense what you're about to hear that I'm going to make up off the top of my head. But hey, we're just doing it for fun. Hey, you're at home, perhaps you've been stuck at home for a while with this global pandemic. Perhaps this video will be some sort of respite from that drudgery. But let's talk about the neighborhoods in Charlotte. Charlotte, of course, being the highlight community that we're focused on all week. And let's just go through them one at a time. Not every neighborhood. We don't have that kind of time. But we can talk about a few of these here. And let's start with Ditzel. Now, Ditzel is interesting because it was the original site of the beginning of the eBay company. eBay, I believe, today is in California. I could be wrong. In Silicon Valley. But a lot of people don't know that eBay started in Charlotte in the very early days. Now, in the very early days of eBay, it wasn't even an online company. It was all done by cell phone right there in Ditzel. And Ditzel was the original name of eBay. They just went ahead and called it by the name of the town. But it also kind of fit because what would happen, instead of putting an item on eBay like you would today or have any time in the last 20 plus years, if you wanted to put an item up for bid in Ditzel, you would take it to the middle of town and place it in the city park. And it was almost like a flea market in a sense. But what made it interesting is that you then took a photo of it and then faxed the photo. Now, fax machine, if you're not aware of what that is, it's similar to a printer, but with a telephone attached. So you could essentially make a copy of something, and then the copy would be sent through the phone lines. And that's how they did it. So you would sit at home next to your fax machine, and the items would come in that were for sale down at the city park. So you'd place your item alongside everybody else, and almost like a flea market mall. And people could come around and look at them, but they couldn't buy them on the site. You had to bid on them through the fax system. The way that they used the city park was just to have a organized way of putting the items in an area where if people wanted to see them in person and review them and check out their condition, they could. So then the computer revolution started, and somebody said, why don't we put all of this online? So they originally started with Ditzel.com. That was the original site of eBay. And then it grew so fast that they decided to move the operation to Silicon Valley and change it into an online service that very, very similar. There's not a whole lot different from the first change to eBay then and what you have now, because the process is so simple. Put items online, other people bid, somebody wins the bid, boom. So that's very exciting that Ditzel was the site of really one of the iconic American software companies in the early days of the PC and online revolution. It's very exciting. Now, another neighborhood that gets a lot of attention in the area is Sugar Creek. And the reason being that it's a geological marvel, because there's actually sugar in Sugar Creek. And so what they'll do is it's Have you ever gone to a resort, either in the desert perhaps, or even the Rocky Mountains have them, where you can sit in hot springs, and the hot springs, the natural hot springs in the ground, act as a sauna, so it relaxes your bones, relaxes your muscles? Well, in this case, you have a geological wonder where the sugar's actually in the water. So you can just dip your bowl of Wheaties right into the water and get that sugar, and then you would just tilt the bowl and hold it the other hand so the cereal doesn't fall out. And then the sugar would stay and the water would go back into the creek. You could essentially get sugar on anything you want just by dipping it into the creek. And in fact, it's such a tradition that it's allowed by state law to be able to dip food items, anything you need to put some sugar on real quick to make it a little less tart. Perhaps even something like beef jerky, where out of the package it just might be too tangy. You just need a little bit of that sugar to soften it something. You can do that at Sugar Creek. Now, Sugar Creek also has used this phenomena to build an entire sugar industry all along the creek through the Charlotte area. And in fact, the latest statistics from the American Department of Sugar in Washington says that 17% of all sugar products originate from Sugar Creek in Charlotte. It's an amazing thing. Now we'll talk more about Sugar Creek, but let's continue on to get a flavor of some of the other exciting neighborhoods in Charlotte. For example, you have Dilworth. Now, Dilbert, the comic strip, has run for many years. And the writer and artist of that, the originator, the founder, the innovator of Dilbert, is now a fairly prominent personality on Twitter, and is a regular New York Times bestselling author. Scott, what's his name, who started the strip in Charlotte when he was going to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He started Dilbert in his dorm, and because Dilbert became such a hit that he was able to buy a neighborhood that used to have a different name. Okay, so Dilworth, which he named after this comic strip Dilbert, after he bought the entire neighborhood. Before that, it was called Leafy Green, because it's kind of a upscale neighborhood with a lot of big trees and a lot of old homes. And he actually had to pay, I think, $3 trillion for the neighborhood. But of course, the Dilbert comic strip had been popular for a while, and then he was able to make that purchase. And now, like I said, he's a prominent author. He's one of the people that actually predicted that President Trump would be elected against many of the other predilectors, or prognosticators is maybe the word I'm looking for there. And so as a result, his profile rose among the Twitter community and the pundit community, and so he continues to have more success, and it shows you why he was able to buy the Leafy Green neighborhood and change it into Dilworth. But it's beautiful. Now, in South Park, it's funny too. South Park was also has ties to Hollywood, because South Park was where these, if you've heard of the animated cartoon show on TV, I believe it originated on Fox, and that's called South Park. Now, South Park started in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, what happened was they wanted to get a different kind of, some of the producers, after the show started to become popular, thought, well, we could keep it in Charlotte. The original episodes of this show were set in Charlotte, because in the South Park area, like the characters came from South Park, is how they positioned the show in the early days. But the producers of the show and the originators the artists and writers that started this show, Trent and the other guy, they felt like they had to move it to Colorado because a lot of times with animation, it doesn't do as well at lower elevation levels. It has something to do with the animation process. When the air pressure is thinner at higher elevation levels, the animation actually looks better when they produce it. So they set the show in Colorado. So that's why the later episodes, probably from the second season on, are set in Colorado. It's because at that elevation, you're going to have a much better result in the animation process. I'm not really sure the science, but it's fascinating that Charlotte, this historical city in the South that has strong ties to the American Revolution, it goes all the way back. I mean, there's episodes of Charlotte residents kicking out the British when Charlotte was like 6 log cabins. a British military leader, captain or lieutenant, somebody, wanted to move into one of the homes in Charlotte, wanted to build a house. One or the other, build a house or move in or something. Charlotte said, "Get your red coat out of here." They kicked him out. This is before the American Revolution. So Charlotte has a very long, it's baked into the city. It's revolutionary fervor, right? And to have this community tied to Hollywood in so many ways is really fascinating, and one of the great things about this job and doing these videos. Now, if you look over at the Northeast area, you'll find a community called University City. And of course, you can tell by the name that it's tied very closely with the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Now, it's funny because UNC Charlotte doesn't get quite the press of UNC Chapel Hill, partly because of UNC Chapel Hill being in the research triangle, so it's tied to tech, which gets a lot of press these days. And of course, UNC Chapel Hill also has strong sports teams. They've got a good lacrosse team. Their curling team has always been really good. They've always been good at volleyball, tetherball, dodgeball. They've got an internationally known dodgeball team. They've constantly won the NCAA. In fact, the only time that the dodgeball team at the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill lost the National Collegiate Dodgeball Championship was in 1934, and the only reason was it was during the Depression, and they couldn't quite inflate. There was a government restriction on air going into dodgeballs to keep that air available for the poorer people and to keep things to have restrictions on all items so that it could be rationed out. In case they needed air in other areas of the country, they limited how much you could put in dodgeballs. And unfortunately, they didn't get quite the action, the bounce that you need to win an NCAA championship. And the UNC Chapel Hill was unable to bring home the win that year. But in a way, you could say it was a sacrifice for the country because that air was able to be used for more needy communities, let's say, or more needy persons in the area. So that's probably a charming story for them. But right now, we're looking at University City. The UNC Charlotte campus is so vibrant and so festive. Because here you have a neighborhood named after the university, in other words, University City. They could have called it any other thing, but they called it University City because the university plays such an important role in that community. In fact, if you live in University City, whether you're tied to the university or not, you get free rent. So everybody in University City, their rent is paid for by the university. And the way they do that is that the funds that the students pay for professors, for the campus buildings, all of the services that would otherwise go to students through their tuition and through money coming in from the state is diverted to rent for community members in the University City. And you say, well, wouldn't that shortchange the students on their education? The thing that the University of North Carolina, Charlotte figured out very early on, which was smart, and the leaders and the city fathers and mothers, they figured out that most students that go to college don't care about going to college. It's not this, they don't care about going to class. In fact, the study showed that 69 to 74% of students never go to class. So it's not that they're anti-education. They're just pro-partying. They just want a social life. They want to date co-eds. Okay, they want to go to keggers. That's what they want. I mean, you can cut it any way you want, but that's the truth. And so the University of North Carolina, Charlotte was smart. They said, look, rather than spend all this money on university buildings and teachers and all this stuff that most colleges have, why don't we just pay the rent of the residents of the community, whether they're tied to the university or not? And that will provide a stable base that will accommodate these crazy students that are going through some kind of natural transition typically between the age of 17 to 23, depending, 18 to 22, where they feel the need to go out of their minds on a weekly basis at keg parties, at football game pre-games. They'll pre-game before the game, they'll party at the game, and they'll party after the game until they pass out. And what do they do the next day? They do it again. So the university was smart. They said, look, this is obviously what they're going to spend their time doing. Let's use our valuable resources to help the community. And that's why you have the rent-free situation in University City. Now, you say, well, I'm going to move there. I like this. The problem is, guys, University City is only so big, and there's a waiting list to get in to an apartment in University City. In fact, some landlords are taking advantage of it because they know they're getting their pay no matter what. They're getting their people are getting paid rent no matter what, right? And the landlords get a cut. So they're making like bathrooms into apartments. You walk into a bathroom and you go, okay, where's the rest of the apartment? They go, no, this is it. You sleep in the bathtub, and you sit on the toilet with the lid down, and that's how then you put your laptop in your lap, and that's how you do your work. You got a USB port, and there's free Wi-Fi. And that's how they do it, and that's like $2,000 a month for that. It's free. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. But I'm telling you, there's a waiting list to get in, and that's what landlords are doing in order to have more people so that they get they'll get a different rent check. They'll get an additional rent check. So instead of having a building with 4 apartments where they'd get a rent check of maybe $1,200 a month from the university paid up front, they'll change that apartment building of 4 apartments into 78 apartments that are the size of, about 75 square feet, if that, maybe 45 square feet, and then they'll get a rent check and multiply their income. But again, everybody's a winner, and it's a really innovative idea. All right, well, let's look at some other communities. You've got Weddington. Now, Weddington was where the Bridal magazine was first published. And Bridal magazine is, if you don't know, the industry standard in the wedding industry in terms of brides looking at different dresses, you'd be surprised, especially if you're a guy. You may not have any idea. But the bridal industry is a $15 trillion industry worldwide every year. Girls go crazy. Now, if you're a father and you've had a daughter get married and you've paid for the wedding, you know. But most guys have no clue. And Weddington was the way that Weddington developed was they got in early on the bride industry. And it goes all the way back. Like I said, there's a very long history in Charlotte. And Weddington was doing bridal innovations long before Bridal Magazine. But that just came out of that rich soil of developing weddings, creating innovative wedding ideas. So if you look back, like in the early 1800s, Weddington was the site of, there was a lot of churches in the area and people would get married at the churches. This is how it kind of all started. And some of the ladies that are watching these weddings, they go, we can do it better. It's not that the wedding at the church, it's just that the whole process. They said, look, we can make this much better. So they started to make wedding dresses out of, if you look at the wagon trains, they had those tarps over the top of the wagons. They started to make wedding dresses out of those tarps. They started to make wedding dresses out of American flags. They started to make wedding dresses out of the saddle blankets that the military officers would put over their horse before the saddle blankets. And this is the kind of innovation that has kept Charlotte at the forefront, has helped it grow over the hundreds of years that it's been in existence, guys. And so as the wedding industry grew, and as consumer dollars became, for example, after World War II, the United States boomed. And what happens when you have a booming economy and a booming population? Well, you have weddings. And Weddington then cemented itself as the headquarters of the bridal industry. And in fact, you can go to Weddington today and visit the Bridal Magazine offices and the Bridal Hall of Fame, which is a 3-story, 2-hour tour through the wedding museum. And it shows you some of the most iconic weddings throughout history and how Weddington was such an important part of those weddings. It's kind of fascinating. So let's look then, let's see. What else do we got? Let's do one more. University City we did. Yeah, Eastover. Now, Eastover is a really interesting area because it was the center of the founding. Let me see how to explain this because it gets kind of complicated. So if you're familiar with apple turnovers, they started in Eastover, and originally apple turnovers were called Eastovers because in those days, in that neighborhood on the west side, you had a very strong cheesesteak street where you could go along up and down this particular street and get cheesesteaks. Now, this is long before Philadelphia became kind of the city associated with cheesesteaks. But if you wanted apple turnovers, you went to another street called Farnsworth Street in the Eastover neighborhood. Now, a lot of people would get a cheesesteak and then take a horse and buggy over and get a apple turnover on Farnsworth Street in Eastover. But in those days, they were called Eastovers. So you'd go into a shop, you'd say, "Hey, Harold, give me 2 Eastovers with icing for the kids, and Ma and I will just have a regular Eastover." And Harold would be like, "Hey, guys, come on in. We got them on sale, and we got our new chocolate Eastovers. You might want to give them a try." And that father would be like, "Fine, give me one, and Ma'll have a regular, and give the icing Eastovers to the kids." And that's kind of how it went. And then over time, people didn't know what an Eastover was as they tried to expand the idea beyond the neighborhood, beyond the city. And so somebody came up with the idea of apple turnovers. And that's how the apple turnover industry grew to the $2 billion industry it is today. But originally, they were called Eastovers. And in fact, I wish we would go back to that. Eastovers sounds better to me than apple turnover, which just sounds like you took a bunch of apples and flipped them in the air and they landed on the ground, so you threw them back in the pan and then cooked them again. You know what I'm saying? So that's a really interesting history too. So guys, that is just, there's like 200 neighborhoods in Charlotte. That's just a few of them. But we could be here for 4 hours. In fact, we might want to do a live stream one day from Charlotte and tour all of the neighborhoods. And whether it takes 3-4 days, we'll just go live for 72 hours straight. In fact, leave a comment below here on the YouTuber if you think that's a good idea. We'll put that on the board at the next meeting and take a vote on it, see if we can do that. A 72-hour live stream tour of all 200 neighborhoods in Charlotte. Let me know what you think about that idea. Guys, that's it for this video. Come on back. We're going to cover so much more about Charlotte this week. And next week, we'll kick into a new community. And of course, this is a parody channel. As I mentioned, all of this stuff is just made up by me off the top of my head because, well, I've got problems. Talk to you soon.